Let me help you. After all, a dress like this must be a fortune for you. Right?" The words remained unspoken, but the venom behind them hung in the air at the Sterling mansion in the Hamptons. Michael Sterling stood at the marble bar, watching the massive crystal chandelier scatter diamond shards over a sea of whispering, laughing people. His family's annual dinner was the perfect stage, a display of extreme wealth. And tonight, the woman he'd hired to play a supporting role had unexpectedly taken the place of the leading lady. Michael Sterling stood at the marble bar, his whiskey barely touched. From his perch, he had a view of the lavish ballroom of his family's Hamptons mansion. The lights from massive crystal chandeliers danced across silk evening gowns and millions of dollars worth of diamond jewelry. The clinking of glasses mixed with classical music and lively conversation, creating a symphony of wealth and power. But Michael didn't hear anything. All his attention was focused on a corner of the room where a group of people were gathered. And in the center of that group was Harper Rose. A strange feeling, a mix of shock and confusion, was churning in his chest. This was the woman he'd paid $50,000 to impersonate his wife for 6 hours. A simple business transaction, a desperate solution to a pressing problem. He'd given her a brief, fake resume, carefully crafted backstories, and expected her to smile, nod, and try not to show her incompetence. He was wrong. Very wrong. Harper wasn't out of place. She was in the spotlight. And she wasn't just standing there smiling. She was talking, her hands moving to emphasize her words, her eyes shining with an intelligence and passion that couldn't be faked. She wasn't talking about the latest fashions or exclusive resorts. Michael squinted, trying to listen. She was arguing with Sir Arthur Harrison, a 70-year-old industrial icon, the man on whom the future of Sterling innovations depended. But Mr. Harrison, her voice was clear and confident, rising above the surrounding noise. The notion that Elizabeth Bennet was simply a product of her times misses the subtle rebellion in her every action. Her refusal of Mr. Collins' proposal was not just a personal rejection, it was a declaration of autonomy in a society where women had none. That is why the first edition of Pride and Prejudice has such profound literary value. Mr. Harrison, a notoriously fastidious and rarely impressed man, leaned forward, listening intently, a genuine smile of amusement on his lips. An excellent analysis, ma'am. Very astute. Most people only remember the love story. Oh, the love story is a wonderful bonus. Harper smiled, a smile so bright and genuine that Michael felt his heart skip a beat. But at its core is the struggle for self-worth. That's what makes it timeless. Michael stood stock still. He had hired a bookstore owner. He knew she was smart, but he had never imagined this. Her charisma, her knowledge, her unwavering confidence in this pack of wolves. It was astonishing. She wasn't acting the role of a rich CEO wife. She was simply being herself. And that was what was winning everyone over. He realized bitterly that he had judged her entirely on her financial situation, a mistake he had always despised in others. His eyes scanned the crowd and stopped on a familiar figure. Victoria Davenport, his ex-girlfriend. She was standing in the corner, a glass of champagne in her hand, her icy gaze fixed on Harper. The sneer on Victoria's perfectly made-up face said it all. She wasn't just jealous, she was offended. Offended that a nobody could steal the spotlight that was rightfully hers. Victoria whispered something to her friend standing next to her, and though she couldn't hear it, Michael could read the venom in it. Let's see how long this Cinderella mouse can last. A chill ran down Michael's spine. He had pulled Harper into a world whose cruelty he knew all too well. He had thought it was a simple play, but now he realized the curtain had just risen, and the villain was ready to take the stage. The problem was, he wasn't sure how he wanted it to end. A week ago, the atmosphere in Michael's loft office at Sterling Innovations was a stark contrast to the party's splendor. It was heavy and tense. The New York afternoon sun streamed through the huge windows, but it did nothing to dispel the overarching gloom. They're hesitating. Michael, David Chen, his CEO and closest friend, said bluntly, "The merger with Harrison Legacy is a golden opportunity, but Arthur Harrison is an old-fashioned guy. He hears the rumors. What rumor? Michael rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. That he was an unstable player. That his split with Victoria had made him reckless. Harrison believed in family values, stability, succession. He wanted a partner who was grounded, not a billionaire bachelor who was making headlines in the tabloids. Michael gritted his teeth. The truth was that the breakup with Victoria had been unpleasant, but it had been because of her domineering and empty nature, not because he wanted to pursue a wild lifestyle. But the media was telling a different story, and Arthur Harrison was listening. The annual party in the Hamptons is this weekend, David continued. Harrison and his wife will be there. This is your last chance to make an impression. You need to show him stability. How show him the company balance sheet? Michael snapped. No, by bringing a mate. A wife, David said, his voice serious. The idea was ridiculous. Insane. But as Michael looked into David's eyes, he knew it was the only solution. His lawyer suggested finding a professional actor or someone from a high-end matchmaking agency. Michael dismissed it immediately. The risk of being exposed, blackmailed, or dealing with someone who was only interested in money was too great. He needed someone real, someone he could trust, at least for 6 hours. That afternoon, to decompress, Michael wandered the streets of the West Village, aimlessly. He passed high-end boutiques, noisy cafes, and then something caught his eye. A small, unassuming storefront with a worn wooden sign, the Gilded Page Antiquarian Bookstore. Driven by a sudden curiosity, he pushed the door open and entered. A small bell rang. The air inside was warm, filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a scent reminiscent of knowledge and peace. Among the towering stacks of books, he saw her. Harper Rose. She was standing behind the counter, her chestnut brown hair pulled back in a loose bun, a few stray bangs framing her delicate, unadorned face. She was engrossed in explaining something to an elderly customer, her hand lightly running over the spine of a leather-bound book. It's not just a book, ma'am. It's a piece of history. Just think of the people who have held it. Read it over the past 100 years. Michael stood silently listening, captivated by the genuine passion in her voice. She wasn't trying to sell a product. She was sharing a story. There was a calmness and intelligence about her, a steadiness that was at odds with his flashy but artificial world. As the elderly visitor left with a satisfied smile, Harper's phone rang. She turned away, and Michael overheard her conversation. Her voice, normally full of enthusiasm, now dropped, tinged with worry. I understand, but double the rent. No, I don't have enough yet. This is all my father left me. I just need a little more time. She hung up, let out a shaky breath, and buried her face in her hands. In that moment, Michael no longer saw a strange shopkeeper. He saw someone fighting to protect his legacy. Someone with dignity but teetering on the brink of despair. And a crazy, daring, and perhaps the most wrong idea of his life came to his mind. He walked up to the counter. "Excuse me," he said. Harper raised his head, his eyes slightly red, but his gaze still direct. "How can I help you?" Michael got straight to the point. A business practice he now found rude. "I overheard your call. I have a proposition. A business proposition." He laid out his plan briefly, matter-of-factly, trying to make it sound plausible. He needed someone to impersonate his wife at an important event. 6 hours, nothing fishy. A play. Harper stared at him, disbelief and insult written all over her face. "Are you kidding me? Who do you think I am? I think you're a smart, decent, struggling person," Michael said, his voice softening. "I don't mean to insult you. I'm in a desperate situation too, and I'll pay the price." He took out a pen and wrote on a notepad, $50,000. Harper looked at the number, then back at his eyes. She saw the stress, the exhaustion, and maybe a little sincerity in it. She wasn't a dreamer. She was a realist. $50,000 wouldn't just save her bookstore, it would give her a new start. After a long silence, She nodded firmly. Okay. But on my terms. I agree, Michael replied immediately. First, she said, her voice clear, we will have a clear contract, drawn up by your lawyer. Second, no intimacy that is not necessary for the play. Only what is absolutely necessary in front of others. Third, if I am to play your wife, I need to know the whole story. I need to know who I am, how we met, and I need to know about the people I will be meeting. I am not a bad actress. Michael nodded, a sudden sense of relief spreading through him. He hadn't picked the wrong person. Deal. And just like that, an unlikely contract was signed. A contract that would catapult a small bookstore owner into the heart of New York high society and change both of their lives in ways neither could have foreseen. On the evening of the party, a shiny black car pulled up in front of the Gilded Page bookstore. Michael's assistant got out, followed by two others carrying large boxes of clothes from brands like Chanel and Dior. Harper opened the door, looking at the sparkling gowns displayed before her. They were beautiful, but they weren't her. They were a costume, a shell. She smiled politely at the assistant. Thank you very much, but I already have something to wear. The assistant looked confused, but Harper was adamant. A moment later, when she walked out of the store and into her car, Michael, who was waiting inside, was momentarily stunned. Harper wasn't wearing any designer gowns. She was wearing a long emerald green silk gown, a timeless classic. The dress was simple, without any fancy embellishments, but it hugged her figure perfectly, accentuating her fair skin and accentuating the color of her eyes. Her hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, revealing her high neck and a pair of small pearl earrings. She didn't look like she was trying to be someone else. She looked like she belonged here. You look amazing, Michael stammered, realizing his words were completely true. Thanks, Harper replied, a small smile playing on her lips. This is my mother's dress. She said true elegance comes from confidence, not labels. On the way to the Hamptons, they went over the script. They met at a rare book auction. Michael was attracted to her intelligence, and she was impressed by his respect for literature. They were married in a private ceremony 6 months ago. The story was simple enough to be believable. But when they entered the ballroom, Michael realized that no script could prepare him for the reality. Harper didn't just play the part, she made the role her own. The details of her conversations at the party, as Michael witnessed them, were remarkable. She did not cling to him like a shadow. Instead, she moved confidently through the crowd. When a famous art collector showed off his latest painting, Harper did more than just say it was beautiful. She discussed the use of light and shadow, comparing it to Caravaggio's chiaroscuro technique, which left him in awe. When a real estate developer showed off his new skyscraper, she asked him about the classical Greek influences in the design of the main lobby. She won the heart of Mrs. Harrison, a woman who loved gardening, not by complimenting her garden, but by sharing her knowledge of breeding rare David Austin roses. Mrs. Harrison held her hand and talked endlessly. People were drawn to her. In a world where the conversation often revolved around money, stocks, and mergers, Harper brought a refreshing dose of culture, history, and art. She was an oasis of wisdom in a desert of material wealth. Then the dance came. Michael led her onto the dance floor, when he placed his hand on her waist and she gently placed it on his shoulder. A warm current ran through him. The touch was no longer part of the contract. It felt real. You know, Harper whispered, close enough for only he to hear. That man over there has a mustache that looks exactly like a sleepy walrus. Michael laughed. A real, hearty laugh. Something he hadn't done in a long time. He looked down at her, and under the chandelier light, he saw the sparkle in her eyes. He found himself no longer thinking about the Harrison legacy deal. He was thinking about the woman in his arms, and that lady with the feather necklace. He replied, "Looks as if she's about to fly away." They smiled together. In that moment, on the crowded dance floor, With hundreds of eyes watching, they shared a small secret, a genuine connection. Michael realized that this play was becoming deliciously dangerous. He wasn't just acting, he was starting to feel, and the feeling was both terrifying and wonderful. He knew that the night was far from over, and whatever happened next would be unscripted. Harper's brilliance couldn't help but attract Victoria Davenport's attention. For Victoria, Harper's existence in Michael's arms was already an insult, but her being the star of the party was a declaration of war. With a fake smile plastered on her lips, Victoria swept through the crowd and approached them. Just as the dance ended, "Michael, dear," she said, her voice honeyed but venomous. "You haven't introduced me to your new friend." She turned to Harper, her eyes scanning her appraisingly. "I'm Victoria Davenport, a very close friend of Michael's." "Nice to meet you," Harper replied calmly, her voice steady. "I'm Harper Sterling." The name Sterling coming from Harper's mouth seemed like a slap in Victoria's face. "Sterling. That's interesting. You're fast." "Michael. So, Harper, where's your family?" "The Hamptons, Palm Beach. I'm sure we've met somewhere." It was a trick question, a way to test and discredit. "My family is in New York," Harper replied simply, unflinchingly. "We're not people who move around a lot. We believe in putting down roots." Victoria raised an eyebrow. Finding no opening to attack, having failed to threaten privately, she decided to act publicly. A few minutes later, as Harper stood talking to a small group, including Lord Harrison and his wife, Victoria approached. She placed her hand on Michael's arm, a gesture of clear possession. "My dear Michael, you must tell us where you found this gem. It seems none of us have had the pleasure of meeting her before. What a mystery." The room seemed to quiet down for a moment. All eyes were on Michael and Harper. This was the moment Victoria had been waiting for. A public interrogation. Michael felt his heart pound. He was about to give a prepared answer, a romanticized story about their meeting. But before he could open his mouth, Victoria struck. "Oh, sorry," she exclaimed in a fake voice. With a deliberately clumsy movement, she tipped the glass of red wine in her hand, spilling it straight onto the front of Harper's emerald green silk dress. A crimson stain spread across the light-colored fabric, an ugly and humiliating stain. A soft "oh" rose from the crowd. Silence fell. Everyone knew this was no accident. It was an attack, a cruel act designed to humiliate Harper, to ruin her perfect appearance and scream to the world, "You don't belong here." Harper froze for a moment, looking down at the stain on her mother's dress. Michael saw a flash of hurt in her eyes before she quickly hid it behind a calm expression. Victoria smiled triumphantly. "Oh, I am so clumsy. Let me help you." She pretended to grab a napkin, ready to make the situation worse by rubbing at the stain. But Michael acted. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He acted with a cold determination that made everyone hold their breath. He calmly put down his glass, took a step forward, and gently pushed Victoria's hand away from Harper. Then, in a protective gesture, he took off his expensive tuxedo jacket and draped it over Harper's shoulders, completely covering the wine stain. He didn't look at Harper. He looked straight at Victoria, his blue eyes cold as ice. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp and clear, enough for everyone around to hear. "Victoria," he said, "grace is something money can't buy, and Harper has it in abundance." He paused for a second, letting his words sink in. Then he continued, his eyes never leaving Victoria. "As for where I found her, it's a place that holds more value, history, and truth than all of us in this room combined." He turned to Sir Harrison, who was watching the whole thing with an unreadable expression. "Excuse me, sir. My wife needs attention." Without waiting for a reply, Michael placed an arm around Harper's waist, a firm, protective hug, and led her through the crowd that parted like waves. He left behind a stunned Victoria Davenport, her face changing from triumph to humiliation, and a room filled with admiring whispers at the action of a man who had just publicly defended his woman before the world. In that moment, the play ended. and something much more real had just begun. Michael led Harper out of the noisy ballroom, down a quiet hallway, and into the family's private library. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, cutting them off from the outside world. The room was quiet, except for the soft ticking of an antique clock. Harper shook as she took off Michael's jacket and looked down at the stain on her dress. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice sincere. "For doing this." "Nothing," Michael replied. He took a clean silk handkerchief from the drawer, dipped it in a glass of water, and knelt gently in front of her. He began dabbing at the stain, trying to soak up some of the wine. The gesture, the unexpected gentleness from a man of such power, took Harper by surprise. The awkwardness of a business deal had vanished. There was now a quiet intimacy between them. "What I said out there?" Michael looked up at her, still holding the scarf on her dress. "I meant it. All of it." Harper looked deep into his eyes, searching for the truth. "Why?" Michael sighed, standing up and walking to the window, looking out at the dark garden. "Because I was tired of lies, tired of people like Victoria." He turned back to face her. "The real reason I broke up with her wasn't because I wanted to party. It was because I couldn't stand that emptiness anymore. A world where a person's worth was measured by the labels on their clothes or the balance in their bank account. A world where kindness was seen as weakness and cruelty was disguised as honesty." He stepped closer to her. "Tonight, when I saw you talking to Mr. Harrison, when I saw you being yourself, smart and passionate and fearless, I realized how foolish I had been. Hiring you was a crazy idea, a selfish solution. But meeting you, Harper, was the best thing that has happened to me in years." His heartfelt confession hung in the air between them. Harper felt her cheeks heat up. She didn't know what to say. This was all so much more than she had prepared for. The next morning, as the sun was rising over the Hamptons, Michael's phone rang. It was Sir Arthur Harrison. "Good morning. Sterling," he said brightly over the phone. "I just wanted to say, you got the deal. My board has approved it. We're going to do the merger." Michael felt a wave of relief. "Mr. Harrison, I am glad to hear that. May I ask what convinced you?" There was a deep laugh on the other end of the line. "Last night, I saw two things. One was an extremely intelligent and dignified young woman. The other was a man who didn't hesitate to throw away his image to protect her. You're a good man, Sterling. You know what's important. That's the kind of partner I want." The call ended, leaving Michael feeling victorious, but not because of the deal, but because of another confirmation. A few days later, Michael drove to the Gilded Page. The bookstore looked exactly as he had first seen it, cozy and quiet. Harper was behind the counter, wearing reading glasses, looking like her usual self. He placed an envelope on the counter. Inside was a check for $50,000. "Here's what we agreed on," he said, his voice a little strained. Harper looked at the envelope, then at him. Suddenly, the check was no longer a solution. It felt like a wall, a reminder of the transactional nature of their relationship. It was a divide. She took it, because that was the deal. "Thank you, Michael. No, I should be the one thanking you. Harper," he said. He lingered, wanting to say something more, but no words seemed appropriate. Finally, he just nodded and left, leaving Harper alone in the bookstore, with the check in her hand and an inexplicable sense of loss in her heart. The curtain had fallen, and they had returned to their real lives, in two completely different worlds. A month passed. Harper used the money wisely. She paid off her rent, securing the Gilded Page for years to come. She also used some of it to renovate the store, repainting the walls, installing warmer lighting, and adding some old leather armchairs for customers to sit and read. Her bookstore, her father's legacy, was not just saved, it was reborn. One Tuesday afternoon, as she was carefully arranging a stack of classic literature books, the doorbell rang again. She looked up and her heart skipped a beat. Michael Sterling was standing at the door. But this isn't the powerful CEO in the $1,000 suit. He's wearing a simple gray cashmere sweater and jeans, looking much more relaxed and approachable. He smiled, a slightly embarrassed smile. "The bookstore looks great." "Thanks," she replied, trying to keep her voice calm. "Thanks to a generous investor." He stepped up to the counter, not talking about work, not talking about contracts. "Harper," he began, his voice sincere. "I was wondering if the smartest, most interesting woman I've ever met would like to have dinner with the man who foolishly hired her." He paused, looking her straight in the eye. No contract, no act, no audience, just us. Harper felt a warm glow spread through her chest. She took off her glasses, set them on the counter, and smiled. A real smile. "I would love to. Michael." That's the beginning. 6 months later. The scene pans to the Gilded Page bookstore late one evening. The lights are still on inside. Through the glass windows, one can see a cozy scene. Michael and Harper are sitting side by side on an old sofa, her legs draped over his, both engrossed in a book under the soft yellow light. A cup of tea is steaming on a small table beside them. On the wall behind them, among the old paintings and photographs, one thing stood out. It was a check for $50,000 framed in a formal manner. But if one looked closely, one would see that it was signed on the back, with the words, "Harper Rose," and stamped with the seal of City Children's Library Foundation. Michael reached up and gently brushed a lock of hair from Harper's cheek. He looked at the check on the wall, then back at her, his eyes filled with love. "It was the best investment I ever made," he said quietly. Harper looked up from his book. "Oh, really? More than the merger with Harrison Legacy?" "That deal brought me money," Michael replied, his voice low. "And this investment, it brought me to you." Harper smiled, a smile that contained all the happiness and contentment. She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I guess that's a happy ending to our play?" "No," Michael said, leaning down and placing a kiss on her lips. The kiss was not part of a play, not a calculated act. It was gentle, deep, and full of promise. This is the beginning of our real story. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you love this story, don't forget to click like to support the channel, share this story with family and friends, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories.